Do you ever feel like you're just offering helpful, constructive criticism to your husband and annoyed that he can't just take the feedback? Well, I've definitely been there too. And I want to share an insight from this week's Parsha to help us understand why criticism is such a shutdown emotionally and why it just immediately kills the intimacy between two people. In this week's Parsha, Yaakov is in his last moments. And what does he do? He grabs all of his children, his sons surround him, and he blesses each child and he admonishes each child. And here is kind of an interesting thing. Like, why did he wait for this moment to give them this criticism? For example, with Reuven, he criticizes or, gives this constructive feedback, this admonishment to Reuven about how he could have been the first. He could have had the rights of the firstborn and how he could have been so great, and how if he just hadn't been so impetuous, whatever, like a bad form of spontaneity, impulsive, I guess, and had done the sin that led him to losing those firstborn rights, that things could have been different for him. And of course, he also blesses him, and it's all tied together. And so it kind of seems like a strange thing. Like, this happened so long ago. Why is he only bringing this up now? So to find this answer for Parshas Vayechi, we need to travel all the way to the last book of the Torah, to Devarim. And there we see Moses begins giving rebuke to the Jewish people. And when does he do this? Right before he passes away. And Rashi comments that he learned to do this like Yaakov, like Jacob. That Jacob only did this right before he passed away. Why? The Seg explains in the Rashi there that Yaakov was actually afraid that Reuven would become so hurt by this criticism that he would go to his adversary, that he would actually be so ashamed and feel so embarrassed in front of Yaakov that he was going to leave the Jewish people and go and join Esav. Hold up a second. We're talking about Reuven, who's holy, who's one of the Shvatim, who's connected to Hashem, he's a tough guy. Like, he could handle a little bit of criticism. Thank you very much. And here we're saying that it might have been that he was so ashamed in front of Yaakov that he actually would have left the Jewish people entirely and gone and joined the totally other side of Esav. So that just seems so extreme. And so from this we can learn how careful to be with criticism. Here we were talking about Tzaddikim, right? The most righteous who could, were so pure and egoless. And yet Yaakov was so careful about not giving this criticism because he was afraid it was going to distance him from him and his son, meaning he wanted his son to hear it, so in the end he said it, but he was so careful not to say it at the right time because he knew that it had the potential to cause a distance between them. And so I'm taking a big hit of humility here in my marriage and realizing, wait a second, I cannot expect to be in a space where I'm criticizing my husband and telling him that he's doing something wrong, and at the same time wanting to have that intimacy and that closeness and that deep emotional connection. They just don't go at the same time. And if you think about it, has anyone ever criticized you and maybe put on a brave face and acted humble and be like, oh yeah, I could take it, and maybe even tried to improve from it, but then you felt judged by that person, and therefore you were never going to be as vulnerable or as imperfect or as totally yourself in front of that person again, or maybe not crack that funny joke because you're on guard with that person because you felt judged. So that's definitely so as women. And something we learned from the research of Alison Armstrong about men is that men will actually do the contrary of whatever they're criticized for in many cases. The reason being is that if I'm telling my husband how to be, so now he has a choice. Either he's going to listen, he's going to basically obey, or he's going to be himself and do what he was doing. No longer does he have the space to actually just self-reflect and hear his own soul's whisper and make the next right move that's good for him. Now it's either he's listening to me or he's not. That place of criticism makes it be that now either he's listening to my judgment or he isn't. And so for men, it's this deep place of, if you're not going to accept me as I am, I don't feel whole in this relationship. I'm not going to give you my all. I'm not going to give you the full ability that I really can to give to you. And so just realizing that criticism makes that person be in that space where it's like, okay, either I listen to you and therefore I'm good, or I don't and I'm bad now. And so really just being able to say, what is criticism costing me in my marriage? What is this costing me in terms of connection? What is this costing me in terms of my husband being able to feel like he can be open and real with me? And how might this criticism make him feel? Meaning whenever I gave my husband a constructive criticism, I always thought he was going to pop up and be like, oh, no problem, honey. I'll change that right now, right? It's always this feeling of like, if I just tell him, that's what's going to cause things to change. But really, what actually causes things to change is when we bless each other. So what we see is that not only does Yaakov admonish them, but there's so many blessings within these admonishments. And so when we really care about someone and we really love someone, to really just focus on those blessings, meaning being a blessing, meaning to speak the goodness and the beauty into another person, to be able to see, what my husband's doing, and to go a little bit deeper and thank him for who he is. And from that, allow him to grow from those blessings and grow from the encouragement and go from the ability to see who he actually is. And it's such a simple thing to wonder, why did my husband stop helping me in this way? Or why does he seem shut down in this area? And for me, a good place of self-introspection is being able to say, wait a second, was I critical there? So for example, my husband always sets up my Shabbos candles for me, which is such a beautiful thing. And for me, I could get a little bit particular about things, could you do it like this? Or could you use the specific oil instead of that wax? And it can come off as critical, you're not doing it right. And so if I want to do it myself, I could just do it myself. But if I want to receive the gift of having my husband do that special holy task for me, Erev Shabbos, when there's so much else going on, and get to light the candles I knew that he set up for me, that ability to let go and say, I'm not going to criticize. I'm not going to nitpick. I don't have to be so particular about this exact thing. Yes, I can hone in on my desires, and I can get to a space of gratitude and really know what I love. That's very different than being in that nitpicking place. And so just being able to realize, wait a second, something that for me might have not even felt like it was being critical. I was just talking, or I was just giving a little bit of advice, or I was just commenting. Being able to take that deep breath and be like, wait a second, is this creating deeper connection? Or is this putting my husband on edge, right? Is this coming from a place inside of me of, my desire? Or is this coming from a place of things not being good enough, or wanting things to be better, or wanting to nitpick, or wanting to be in control, or even a place of judgment? And it's such a gift to give ourselves, to free ourselves from the oppression of having to criticize and have a husband self-improvement plan at all times. Being able to let that go and be like, I just get to enjoy the person that I'm married to. That sounds too easy. Really? I just get to enjoy him. I don't need to tweak, and I don't need to comment, and I can just let him do things the way he's doing, even if it makes a mess, or even if it takes longer, even if it costs more money. Really, Hashem? It could be that easy. And the blessing is, yes, it really can be this easy. So taking the blessings of this week's Parsha, of this lesson, of just being so aware of how criticism can cause that distance, and knowing that instead we always want to draw close. And yes, that takes a lot of surrender to Hashem, takes a lot of deep breaths, and it's knowing that when I believe in someone and I praise them and I draw out their gifts and I bless them and I thank them for who they are and I focus on their good points, that's what's going to allow me to draw close to them and get the best out of them. L'chaim. Good Shabbos.